It's the Geekbus here, and I thought I'd talk today about something I heard in the grocery store the other day, of all places. And it was a conversation I couldn't help overhearing. The guy was saying to a woman that he was with, I don't even know what they were talking about, but he was getting a little bit heated about it. And she said, "No need to get defensive." And he said, "I wasn't being defensive, I was being aggressive." Now, I thought to myself, this is not a conversation that you hear every day, never mind in the grocery store. It was kind of weird, to be honest, and I don't know. Were these people mental health care professionals? Probably. But nonetheless, that was the conversation. And I thought to myself, okay, what does that mean? I liked the idea that somebody could say, "You're getting defensive," and somebody else could say, "Well, it wasn't defensive, it was aggressive." It's kind of an argument, although I think maybe one could view being aggressive as being defensive, or one of the ways of being defensive. Who knows? But it did put me in mind of the entire idea of defense mechanisms, and I thought that's something that we could talk about a little bit. Because we used to say all the time, there are these defenses. And we do say you're being defensive when we think somebody doesn't agree with us, that it's good for that. But what does it mean anyway, if anything? And the idea of defense mechanisms, I think those of us in the business tend to think of a mechanism as, I don't know, some little latch and key thing in the brain somewhere, some little Rube Goldberg device that flips a switch or something like that. I don't really see it that way. I think that some of the defenses that are most commonly talked about are ones like denial. I think that's a great one because it's just so clear what it means. If somebody says you're in denial about, say, your drinking, what do they mean? And I think what they mean is you have a drinking problem, which is to say you drink so much that it's caused difficulties in your relationships, it's caused difficulties with the law, it's caused difficulties with your occupation, it's caused difficulties with your health, at least. And why do we say it's caused that? Well, because you didn't seem to have those problems back in the day when you weren't drinking as much. And the person says, "That's nonsense. I don't have any problem with my drinking at all. I could quit drinking anytime I like. I just choose not to." And all those other problems, they might be problems that I have. They're unrelated to the drinking. If I stopped drinking right now, you'd see that I still have those problems. And we say, well, that's denial. That's something everyone else can see. The problem has to do with drinking, but the person themselves cannot see that, or doesn't see it anyway. That's a pretty good example of what we mean. And denial there means that the person is somehow not aware of the obvious, to everyone else anyway. But what is actually happening there is another question. And I like to think of it as a kind of fantasy. But we use the word in my business, fantasy, in a different way from the popular culture sense of the word. We're talking about imagery and feeling configurations that a person might have, not just a story that someone tells themselves, or a delusion that one lives in. It's not exactly that. It's a set of images and narrative, I suppose, that isn't quite the way others would see it. A fantasy, in our sense of the term, is a set of images and a narrative that is in some ways at odds with what everyone else sees, or a large portion of people see. As I try to say this, it's difficult because we don't want people to be unimaginative, and who doesn't live in a fantasy world of one kind or another? It's much more complicated than meets the eye, just to say, well, you're not being realistic. I should say, I don't know if I've said this before, but it's an important thing. If I haven't, whether I have or not, it's an important thing. It has nothing to do with me. But what the thought is about crazy things. because we're talking about what's crazy and what isn't all the time. We say that's a crazy thing that you think, but how do we know that? And what who determines what's crazy and what isn't? And the reason I say this is that you could be told a crazy idea by somebody, and you could say, I think that's crazy. I just that just doesn't strike me as something that I know about in the real world. And so that person's theory about whatever it is crazy, and I thereby dismiss it. Well, I would say that most things that sound crazy, and by crazy I mean highly unrealistic, things that might have more to do with what's going on in someone's head than they do with what's going on out in the world, to the extent that we can tell the difference. And that's a taller order than we think it is, to be honest. But right now, let's just say when you hear a crazy thing, you can write it off as crazy, and most of the time you will be right about that. But there's a corollary to that, and that is every single thing that's new in the world was considered crazy when it first made its appearance. The first person who thought of it was considered crazy. It reminds me of that meme that says the first person who ever drank cow's milk probably did a lot of other weird stuff too. And there's something in it. So you could say everything that sounds crazy pretty much is going to turn out to be crazy. On the other hand, everything that is something real and important was once thought to be crazy. So how do you balance those two things? You have to stay open-minded to the unusual and to the possibility that things that you are disinclined to consider seriously could be correct. And that's not an easy thing to stay open to, and most of us pretty much fail at that. But nonetheless, that's what we're looking at.